My name is Ruby. I'm 52 years old. A few weeks ago, I watched my own daughter-in-law freeze in my doorway. She stood there with her hand on the handle she'd just turned, expecting it to open like it had dozens of times before. But this time, nothing. The door didn't budge. I watched through my peephole as the confusion spread across her face, then the panic, then something close to terror as she realized what had been done. She pulled at that handle again, harder this time, as if she could will it to unlock. When it didn't, she stepped back and stared at my door like she was seeing it for the first time. Like she was finally understanding that this wasn't her house, never had been her house, and I had every right to decide who comes inside. If family boundaries have ever crossed a line in your life, hit that like button. Subscribe so you don't miss how this story unfolds, because what I'm about to tell you will make you question everything you think you know about marriage, respect, and what family really means. And comment below and tell me where you're watching from, because I have a feeling this story is going to resonate with people everywhere. But let me rewind and tell you how we got here, because this didn't start with changed locks and panicked faces. This started months ago with something so small, so seemingly innocent, that I almost missed it entirely. I came home from work on a Tuesday afternoon, tired from a long day at the office, looking forward to nothing more than kicking off my heels and making myself a cup of tea in my own kitchen. But something was off the moment I walked through the front door. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious. Just a feeling, you know? That sensation that someone had been in your space when you weren't there. At first, I couldn't put my finger on what it was. The living room looked normal. The kitchen was clean. My bedroom door was closed just like I'd left it. But then I noticed the coffee mug on the counter, one of my good mugs, the ones I keep for special occasions, sitting there with the faintest ring of dried coffee at the bottom. I stood there staring at that mug for a full minute, trying to remember if I'd used it that morning. I knew I hadn't. I'm a creature of habit, and I always use my everyday mugs for my morning coffee, never the good china. Then I saw the cushions on my couch. They were arranged differently, not quite the way I leave them. The throw pillow that I always keep in the corner was centered now. The magazine I'd left on the coffee table was closed and stacked neatly when I distinctly remembered leaving it open to an article I was planning to finish later. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe I had used that mug and forgotten. Maybe I had tidied up more than usual before leaving for work. Maybe my memory was playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew someone had been in my apartment. Someone with a key. The next week, it happened again. This time I was certain. I always leave my kitchen towel hanging from the oven handle in a specific way, folded in thirds, hanging evenly on both sides. When I came home, it was folded in half and hanging crooked. My salt and pepper shakers had been moved from their usual spot by the stove to the center of the counter. And there was that smell, not my perfume, not my soap, but something floral and cloying that definitely didn't belong in my space. I found myself checking and double-checking that I'd locked my door each morning before leaving for work. I started taking mental photographs of how I left things, the angle of my coffee table books, the position of my reading glasses, the way my throw blanket was draped over the back of the couch. And every day, something was different when I returned. The rational part of my mind kept making excuses. Maybe maintenance had come by to check something. Maybe I was losing my mind. Maybe stress from work was making me imagine things that weren't there. But my gut knew better. Someone was coming into my home when I wasn't there, and they were comfortable enough to make themselves coffee, to sit on my couch, to move through my space like they belonged there. The third time it happened, I found a hair elastic on my bathroom counter. Not mine. Mine are black, and this one was bright pink with little flowers on it. I stood in my bathroom holding that hair tie, and suddenly everything clicked into place. I knew exactly who had been invading my space, and I knew why she thought she could get away with it. My daughter-in-law, Jessica. Sweet, helpful Jessica, who was always so concerned about my well-being. Jessica, who had convinced my son that I needed someone to check on me regularly because living alone wasn't safe for a woman my age. Jessica, who had somehow managed to get a copy of my apartment key just in case of emergencies. The rage that filled me in that moment was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. This wasn't just about someone being in my space without permission. This was about someone systematically violating my privacy and then having the audacity to act like they were doing me a favor. This was about my own family treating me like I was incapable of taking care of myself, like I was some helpless old woman who needed constant supervision. I confronted Jessica the next day when she came by for what she called her weekly check-in. I waited for her to let herself in with that key she shouldn't have had, watched her walk into my living room like she owned the place, and then I spoke. "We need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and level. She turned to me with that bright, fake smile she always wore. "Of course. What's on your mind? I know you've been coming here when I'm not home." For just a split second, her mask slipped. I saw surprise flash across her face, followed quickly by something that looked like annoyance. But then the smile was back, even brighter than before. "I'm just looking out for you," she said, settling herself onto my couch without invitation. "I worry about you being here all alone. I'm family now, and family takes care of each other." Family. She said it like it was some kind of magic word that erased all boundaries, that gave her unlimited access to my life and my home. Like marrying my son had somehow made my personal space communal property. "I appreciate your concern," I said, though appreciation was the last thing I was feeling, "but I don't need you checking on me when I'm not here. If there's an emergency, you can call me." She laughed, actually laughed, like I'd said something amusing. "You're being silly. I barely touch anything when I'm here. I just make sure everything's okay, maybe tidy up a little if I see something out of place. It's what daughters-in-law do." Daughters-in-law. Like that title gave her some kind of authority over me, some right to reorganize my kitchen towels and use my good china. Like being married to my son had somehow made her my caretaker instead of my equal. "Jessica," I said, my voice getting harder despite my efforts to stay calm, "this is my home. I need you to ask permission before coming over, whether I'm here or not." Her smile faltered for just a moment. "I'm just trying to help." "Why are you being so dramatic about this?" Dramatic. There it was, the word that women get called when they dare to have boundaries, when they refuse to be grateful for unwanted intrusion disguised as care. I was being dramatic for not wanting someone in my space without my knowledge. I was being dramatic for wanting control over my own front door. "I'm not being dramatic," I said. "I'm setting a boundary. Please give me back my key." She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her calculating, trying to figure out how to spin this so that I looked unreasonable and she looked like the victim. "I think you're overreacting," she said finally. "But if that's really how you feel, I'll talk to David about it." David. My son. She was going to run to him and frame this as his crazy mother being ungrateful for her thoughtful care. She was going to make him choose between his wife's hurt feelings and his mother's unreasonable demands for privacy. "This isn't about David," I told her. "This is between you and me. I want my key back." She stood up then, smoothing down her skirt with hands that I noticed were shaking slightly. Good. Maybe she was finally starting to understand that this wasn't going to be as easy as she thought. "I'll have to think about it," she said, like she was doing me some kind of favor by considering my request to control access to my own home. After she left, I sat in my living room and tried to process what had just happened. This woman, this person who had been in my family for barely 2 years, thought she had the right to dictate the terms of my privacy. She thought my request for boundaries was something she could choose to honor or ignore based on her own judgment of what was best for me. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Not just angry, furious. Absolutely livid at the presumption, the condescension, the casual dismissal of my autonomy. I was 52 years old, not 92. I had been taking care of myself just fine for decades before she came along, and I would continue to do so long after she was gone. But what made me sickest was the realization that she was probably right about David. If she played this right, if she framed it as concern for my mental health or my safety, he would take her side. He would see her request to keep the key as reasonable and my objection as evidence that I was becoming difficult in my old age. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling and thinking about trust. About how easily it could be broken and how hard it was to rebuild. Jessica had shattered something fundamental between us, something that couldn't be fixed with apologies or promises to do better. She had shown me that she saw me as lesser, as someone whose wishes mattered less than her own comfort and convenience. My apartment no longer felt like a sanctuary. Every time I left for work, I wondered what I would find when I returned. Every time I heard footsteps in the hallway, I tensed, waiting for the sound of a key in my lock. The place that was supposed to be my refuge from the world had become a source of anxiety and stress. I started noticing other things too, small violations that I had previously attributed to my own forgetfulness. My shower gel was running out faster than usual. She was using my bathroom. The level in my good bottle of wine had dropped. She was helping herself to my alcohol. There were crumbs in my toaster that I hadn't made. She was eating my food. She wasn't just checking on me. She was treating my home like her personal clubhouse, a place where she could go to relax and enjoy my things when she needed a break from her own life. And she had convinced herself that this was somehow a service she was providing, that I should be grateful for her attention. 2 weeks went by, and Jessica acted like our conversation had never happened. She continued her check-ins, continued letting herself into my apartment, continued moving through my space like she belonged there. The only difference was that now she was more careful about covering her tracks. The coffee mug was washed and put away properly. The cushions were returned to their original positions. But I could still smell her perfume in my living room, still find traces of her presence in the small things she couldn't help but touch. The final straw came on a Friday afternoon. I had left work early with a headache, looking forward to a quiet evening at home. I opened my apartment door to find Jessica sitting at my kitchen table, eating what appeared to be my leftover Chinese takeout from the night before, while scrolling through her phone like she was in her own dining room. She looked up when I walked in, and for just a moment, I saw annoyance flash across her face. Not surprise, not embarrassment, annoyance. Like I was interrupting her peaceful afternoon in my own home. "Oh, hi," she said, quickly plastering on that fake smile. "I didn't expect you home so early. I was just checking on things and thought I'd grab a quick bite. I hope you don't mind." I minded. I minded everything about this scene. I minded that she was sitting at my table without permission. I minded that she was eating my food without asking. I minded that she was acting like my unexpected arrival in my own apartment was somehow inconvenient for her. "Actually, I do mind," I said, setting my purse down carefully and trying to control the tremor in my voice. Her smile flickered. "It's just leftovers. You weren't going to eat them anyway." "That's not the point." "Then what is the point?" she asked, and now the mask was slipping more obviously. I could see irritation in her eyes, frustration that I wasn't playing along with her game anymore. "The point is that this is my home, and you don't get to decide what I will or won't eat, or when or how. You don't get to help yourself to my things just because you think I won't notice or won't care." She stood up then, abandoning any pretense of apologetic embarrassment. "You're being ridiculous. I'm family. This is what families do. We help each other, we share things. We don't stand on ceremony over a container of lo mein." There it was again. Family. The magic word that was supposed to erase all boundaries, all personal autonomy, all individual rights. According to Jessica's definition of family, I had given up my right to privacy the moment she married my son. "Jessica," I said, my voice deadly calm now, "I want you to leave. And I want you to give me back my key before you go." She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her weighing her options. She could apologize, try to smooth things over, promise to do better. Or she could double down, make this my fault, paint me as the unreasonable one. She chose to double down. "I can't believe you're being so selfish," she said. "I'm trying to take care of you, and you're acting like I'm some kind of criminal. Do you know how many women would be grateful to have a daughter-in-law who cares enough to check on them?" Selfish. Now I was selfish for wanting control over my own living space. Selfish for not being grateful enough for uninvited intrusion. Selfish for failing to appreciate having my privacy violated on a regular basis. "I don't want you to take care of me," I said. "I want you to respect me." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "This is respect? Making me feel like a stranger in my own family." "You are a stranger," I said, the words coming out harsher than I intended, but feeling absolutely true. "You've been in my family for 2 years, and in that time, you've shown me that you see me as an obstacle to be managed rather than a person to be respected. You've shown me that you think my comfort matters less than your convenience, that my boundaries are less important than your need to feel helpful." Her face was flushing red now, and I could see her struggling to maintain the moral high ground she'd been standing on. "I think you need help," she said finally. "Professional help. This level of paranoia isn't normal for someone your age." And there it was. The nuclear option. I was mentally ill. I was paranoid. I needed professional intervention because I objected to having my home invaded. She was going to pathologize my boundaries, make my perfectly reasonable desire for privacy into a symptom of some larger psychological problem. "Get out," I said quietly. "What?" "Get out of my apartment. Get out now, and don't come back without my explicit invitation." She stared at me like I'd slapped her. "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious. And I want my key." For a moment, I thought she was going to refuse. I could see her calculating whether she could simply ignore my demand and continue as if this conversation had never happened. But something in my face must have convinced her that I was done playing games. She reached into her purse and pulled out my key ring, holding it like it was something precious she was reluctantly giving up. "Fine," she said. "But don't expect me to come running when you fall and can't get up." After she left, I sat in my kitchen and felt something I hadn't experienced in months: peace. My apartment was mine again. The air felt cleaner somehow, like a toxic presence had been removed. I could breathe deeply for the first time in weeks. But I also knew this wasn't over. Jessica wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully, and she certainly wasn't going to let this slide without consequences. She would go home to David and tell him her version of events, painting herself as the concerned daughter-in-law who had been cruelly rejected by his unreasonable mother. She would make this about my mental health, my inability to accept help, my growing paranoia and isolation. I spent the weekend preparing for the fallout. I rehearsed conversations with my son, trying to find ways to explain my position without sounding defensive or crazy. I thought about compromises I might be willing to make, ways to rebuild the relationship without giving up my fundamental right to privacy. But by Monday morning, I had come to a different conclusion. I wasn't going to defend myself. I wasn't going to apologize for wanting boundaries. I wasn't going to compromise on something as basic as controlling who had access to my living space. Instead, I was going to take action. I called a locksmith that afternoon and had my locks changed. Not just rekeyed, completely replaced with a high-security deadbolt that couldn't be duplicated at the local hardware store. I kept the receipt, along with documentation of when and why I'd made the change, just in case Jessica tried to claim I was becoming paranoid or irrational. Then I waited. It took 3 days for Jessica to show up, and when she did, I was ready. I heard her footsteps in the hallway, heard her key slide into the lock, heard her try to turn it. Once, twice, 3 times. Then silence. I crept to my peephole and watched her face as the reality of the situation sank in. The confusion came first. Maybe she had the wrong key, maybe the lock was stuck. Then understanding, and with it, a flash of something that looked like fear. She tried the handle again, pulling at it like she could force it to open through sheer will. When that didn't work, she stepped back and stared at my door. I could see her mind racing, trying to figure out what this meant, what she should do next. She raised her hand to knock, then lowered it. Raised it again, then thought better of it. Finally, she turned and walked away, and I heard her footsteps echoing down the hallway, faster than when she'd arrived. The next morning, my phone rang. David. Mom, what the hell is going on with you and Jessica? His voice was tight with barely controlled anger, and I could hear Jessica's influence in every word. She had gotten to him first, framed the narrative in her favor, painted me as the villain in this story. What did she tell you? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. She told me you've been acting strange lately, that you accused her of stealing from you, that you changed your locks to keep her out. She's really upset, Mom. She was just trying to help you. Just trying to help. There it was again, the magic phrase that was supposed to make everything Jessica had done acceptable. She was just trying to help when she used my shower. Just trying to help when she ate my food. Just trying to help when she rearranged my furniture and used my good china. David, I said carefully, did Jessica tell you that she had a key to my apartment? A pause. She said you gave her one for emergencies. I didn't give her anything. She got a copy made without my knowledge or permission. Another pause, longer this time. That doesn't sound right. Jessica wouldn't do something like that. Ask her, I said. Ask her how she got the key when I supposedly gave it to her, and why she never mentioned having it until now. This is crazy, Mom. Jessica loves you. She's been nothing but kind and helpful since day one. I'm sure she has been, I said, though it nearly choked me to agree. But help that I didn't ask for, that violates my privacy and makes me uncomfortable in my own home, isn't actually helpful. It's controlling. She was worried about you. You live alone, you're getting older, I'm 52, David. I'm not elderly, I'm not infirm, and I don't need a babysitter. That's not what this is about. Then what is it about? I asked. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like your wife decided I needed supervision and appointed herself to the job without consulting me about it. I could hear him breathing hard on the other end of the line, could practically feel his frustration through the phone. He was caught between his wife and his mother, and he was clearly out of his depth. I think you both need to calm down and work this out like adults, he said finally. Jessica is family now, and families don't shut each other out over misunderstandings. Family again. Always family when it was convenient for them, when they wanted something from me. But where was this family loyalty when Jessica was violating my boundaries? Where was this concern for family harmony when she was making me feel unsafe in my own home? This isn't a misunderstanding, David. This is about respect. Your wife has shown me repeatedly that she doesn't respect my autonomy, my privacy, or my right to set boundaries in my own life. You're being dramatic. There it was again. Dramatic. The word that gets thrown at women who dare to have standards, who refuse to be grateful for treatment they never asked for. I was being dramatic for wanting control over my own front door. I'm being clear, I said. Jessica is welcome in my home when she's invited. She's not welcome to let herself in whenever she feels like it, whether I'm here or not. So you're just going to shut her out? Pretend she doesn't exist. I'm going to treat her like any other person who isn't entitled to unlimited access to my personal space. If she wants to visit, she can call first and ask if it's convenient. David was quiet for so long that I wondered if he'd hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold in a way I'd never heard before. I think you need to think very carefully about what you're doing here, Mom. You're driving away the only family you have left. The threat was implicit but clear. Choose Jessica's comfort over your own boundaries, or lose your son. Accept being treated like a child who can't be trusted with her own keys, or accept being alone. I've thought about it very carefully, I said. And I've decided that family that doesn't respect me isn't family worth having. He hung up without saying goodbye. For the next 2 weeks, my phone stayed silent. No calls from David, no texts, no unexpected visits from Jessica. Part of me had expected her to show up with a battering ram and a locksmith, demanding entry to my apartment like some kind of domestic SWAT team. But apparently, she was taking a different approach, the silent treatment designed to make me feel guilty and isolated until I caved and apologized. It didn't work. If anything, the silence was a relief. My apartment felt like mine again. I could leave for work in the morning without wondering what I'd find when I returned. I could relax in my own living room without constantly checking over my shoulder for signs of intrusion. But I also knew this was just the calm before the storm. Jessica wasn't the type to give up easily, and she certainly wasn't going to let me win this battle without a fight. She was probably regrouping, planning her next move, figuring out how to regain the upper hand in this situation. I was right. The next phase of her campaign began 3 weeks after the lock incident, and it was more sophisticated than I had expected. It started with other family members calling. My sister-in-law, whom I hadn't spoken to in months, suddenly reached out to check on my well-being. My nephew called out of the blue to see how I was doing. Even my elderly aunt, who lived across the country and rarely contacted anyone, somehow felt compelled to give me a ring. At first, the conversation seemed innocent enough. How was work? Was I feeling all right? Was I getting out enough, socializing, staying active? But as the calls continued, a pattern emerged. Each conversation eventually circled around to Jessica, how worried she was about me, how hurt she'd been by my recent behavior, how much she missed our close relationship. They weren't calling because they were concerned about me. They were calling because Jessica had contacted them, shared her version of events, and recruited them into her campaign to pressure me into backing down. She had turned my own family into flying monkeys, sending them to deliver her message wrapped in false concern for my mental health. The calls made me feel sick. Not because I cared what these people thought of me, most of them barely knew me well enough to have an opinion, but because of what it revealed about Jessica's character. She was willing to involve innocent bystanders in our conflict, to manipulate my relatives into believing I was having some kind of breakdown, all to avoid the simple act of respecting my boundaries. I started screening my calls, letting everything go to voicemail so I could decide whether each conversation was worth having. Most weren't. The messages followed a predictable script, initial pleasantries, followed by gentle probing about my state of mind, followed by not-so-subtle suggestions that I might want to reconsider my position regarding Jessica. But the campaign wasn't limited to phone calls. About a month after the lock change, I started noticing Jessica in places where she had no business being. The grocery store where I always shopped, even though it was nowhere near her neighborhood. The coffee shop where I sometimes went on weekend mornings. The park where I took my evening walks. She wasn't hiding. If anything, she seemed to want me to see her, to know that she was watching, that she hadn't forgotten about our conflict. She would wave when our eyes met, that same bright, fake smile on her face, like we were old friends who had run into each other by chance. The message was clear: you can change your locks, but you can't change the fact that I'm part of your family now. You can't escape me, can't shut me out completely, can't pretend I don't exist. I'm here, I'm watching, and I'm waiting for you to come to your senses. But instead of intimidating me, these encounters had the opposite effect. They reminded me why I had changed my locks in the first place. This woman was unstable, obsessive, unable to accept that she couldn't control every aspect of every relationship in her life. The fact that she was investing this much time and energy into stalking me proved that I had made the right decision. The final confrontation came 2 months after the lock change, and it happened exactly where I had expected it to, in front of my building. Where Jessica couldn't be accused of trespassing, but where she could corner me before I made it to the safety of my apartment. She was waiting by the entrance when I came home from work, leaning against the wall with studied casualness, like she had just happened to be in the neighborhood. But her eyes were bright with barely controlled emotion, and I could see her hands shaking as she pushed herself off the wall to block my path. "We need to talk," she said, and her voice was different now, sharper, with none of the artificial sweetness I was used to hearing. "No, we don't," I replied, trying to step around her. She moved to block me again, and for a moment I wondered if she was actually going to try to prevent me from entering my own building. "You can't avoid me forever," she said. "I'm not avoiding you. I'm choosing not to engage with you. There's a difference. You're being cruel." Her mask was slipping now, and I could see the rage underneath. "I've tried everything to fix this situation, and you just keep shutting me out." "What exactly have you tried?" I asked. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've spent the last 2 months stalking me and manipulating my family members instead of addressing the actual issue." "The actual issue is that you're mentally ill," she snapped, abandoning all pretense of concern or kindness. "You're paranoid and controlling and completely unreasonable. You need help." There it was. The nuclear option again. I was mentally ill, which meant nothing I said could be trusted, nothing I wanted mattered, and anything she did to override my wishes was justified as helping someone who couldn't help herself. "You know what?" I said, feeling something settle into place inside me, a kind of calm certainty that I hadn't experienced in months. "You're right. I do need help. I need help from people who respect my boundaries. I need help from people who ask before they take. I need help from people who understand that caring about someone doesn't give you the right to control them. I never tried to control you. You made a copy of my key without permission. You entered my home repeatedly without my knowledge. You used my things, ate my food, and rearranged my furniture to suit your preferences. When I asked you to stop, you told me I was being dramatic. When I asked for my key back, you said you'd think about it. What would you call that if not control?" She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her struggling to find a response that would put her back in the moral right. But there wasn't one, and we both knew it. "I was trying to help you," she said finally, but the words sounded weak even to her own ears. "No," I said. "You were trying to help yourself feel important. You were trying to create a relationship where I needed you, where you had power over me, where you could feel useful and indispensable. But I don't need you, Jessica. I never did." Her face crumpled then, and for just a moment I saw her as she really was, not the confident, controlling woman who had been tormenting me for months, but a deeply insecure person who had mistaken dominance for love, invasion for intimacy. "David's never going to forgive you for this," she said, her voice thick with tears and rage. "Maybe not," I said. "But I'll forgive myself, and that's more important." I walked past her into my building, and she didn't try to stop me. When I looked back from the elevator, she was still standing where I'd left her, staring at the building like she couldn't quite believe she'd been shut out of it permanently. That was 3 weeks ago, and I haven't seen or heard from either of them since. My phone doesn't ring with concerned relatives anymore. I don't spot Jessica lurking in my usual haunts. The silence has settled over my life like a warm blanket, and I'm finally starting to remember what peace feels like. Some people might say I overreacted. They might argue that family forgives, that love means accepting people's flaws, that I should have tried harder to work things out. They might point out that I've lost my relationship with my son, possibly permanently, over something as simple as a key. But they would be wrong about what this was really about. This was never about a key. This was about respect, about autonomy, about my fundamental right to control who has access to my personal space and my private life. This was about refusing to be treated like a child or an invalid just because I'm a woman of a certain age who lives alone. Jessica didn't see me as a person with valid feelings and reasonable boundaries. She saw me as a project, a problem to be managed, an obstacle to be overcome in her quest to be the perfect daughter-in-law. She turned my own family against me when I refused to be grateful for her unwanted attention, and then she played the victim when I finally stood up for myself. I don't regret changing those locks. I don't regret standing my ground. I don't regret choosing my own peace of mind over their convenience and comfort. I spent months feeling anxious and violated in my own home, and now I spend my evenings reading in my favorite chair without wondering who might walk through my door uninvited. David made his choice when he decided that his wife's hurt feelings mattered more than his mother's boundaries. Jessica made her choice when she decided that her need to feel helpful was more important than my need for privacy. I've made my choice too, and I'm living with the consequences just fine. Family does not mean unlimited access. Love does not mean erasing someone's boundaries. Marriage does not give you the right to override your spouse's relative's autonomy. And being concerned about someone does not justify violating their trust and invading their space. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way, and some people will only respect you when they have no other choice. Jessica learned that lesson when she stood in front of my building trying to turn a handle that would never open for her again. She learned that access is a privilege, not a right, and privileges can be revoked when they're abused. I learned something too. I learned that standing up for myself doesn't make me cruel or unreasonable or mentally ill. It makes me strong. I learned that I would rather be alone and respected than surrounded by people who see me as something to be managed rather than someone to be valued. The people who matter, who truly care about me, will understand why I had to draw this line. They'll respect my decision even if they don't agree with it. They'll love me enough to let me be the author of my own life instead of trying to rewrite my story to suit their preferences. And the people who don't understand, who think I should have just accepted Jessica's invasions for the sake of family harmony, well, their opinions don't really matter to me anymore. They've shown me where they stand on the question of my autonomy, and I've adjusted my expectations accordingly. Respect starts at the door, literally and figuratively. It starts with understanding that every person has the right to control access to their personal space, their private life, their individual choices. It starts with asking permission instead of assuming entitlement. It starts with accepting no as a complete sentence instead of an opening argument. Jessica never learned that lesson, and it cost her. David never learned it either, and it cost him too. They're both paying the price for their failure to see me as a complete person worthy of basic consideration and respect. I'm not paying that price anymore. I'm free from their expectations, their judgments, their attempts to reshape me into someone more convenient for them to deal with. I'm free to live in my own space on my own terms, answering only to myself for how I spend my time and energy. Some people might call that lonely. I call it liberation. So I want to know, have you ever had to draw a hard line with in-laws or family members who thought marriage gave them special privileges in your life? Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your sanity? Have you ever been called dramatic or unreasonable for wanting basic respect and boundaries? Because if you have, I want you to know that you're not alone. There are more of us than you might think. People who have learned that sometimes the only way to save yourself is to lock the door and throw away the key. People who have discovered that family dysfunction dressed up as love is still dysfunction, and that refusing to participate doesn't make you the problem. We are the ones who have chosen ourselves over the comfort of others. We are the ones who have decided that our peace of mind is worth more than their approval. We are the ones who have learned that respect isn't automatic just because someone shares your last name or sits at your holiday table. And we are the ones who sleep soundly at night, knowing that our doors are locked and our boundaries are intact, protected by our own strength and sustained by our own wisdom. That's worth more than all the family harmony in the world.